All right. Well, thank you again for those that have joined us today. Welcome to the Liberty Counsel briefing. My name is Summer Ingram. I'm VP of Strategic Affairs for Liberty Counsel Action, and Covenant Journey, and excited that you all are here. We're hoping to provide a product for you that helps equip you to know how to pray, whether that be on issues globally, nationally, sometimes at the state level. We're trying to do what we can to provide the insider information to best equip you to be effective in prayer or in action. So we have a full call today. We have a hard stop at 11:25 Eastern. So just wanted to let you all know we're going to do our best to keep the time, the presenters on time, and then also leave a little bit of time for prayer at the end. But we do ask that you pray for these issues on an ongoing basis. Pray for our team on an ongoing basis, as well as of course, if you have additional information that you need, please feel free to look at the websites, lc.org or lcaction.org, which goes into more detail about all of the issues that are discussed here in detail. There's a plethora of information on the website, so please get familiar with the websites. Also, if there's anybody that you think could benefit from this time, please feel free to share the link, the information, the Zoom link to them now and encourage them to join us. We are going to now go to Matt Stever, who is the founder and chairman of Liberty. Let me start out in prayer, first of all. Lord, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing, Lord, in this nation. Thank you. Even as we're in this month of Adar, the Hebrew month of Adar, which is relevant because of Purim, which we know is the time where you helped save the Jewish people from utter destruction miraculously. It feels like we're living that in America right now. We continue to pray that for Israel, but we thank you for the turnarounds that we're seeing in this nation, the miraculous turnarounds. We thank you that during the State of the Union, there was 400. The president acknowledged 400 executive actions that have taken place in 6 weeks. 6 weeks into this administration, we're seeing tremendous turnaround as it relates to righteousness and truth. And we're so grateful, Lord. We're so grateful. We ask that this time would be glorifying to you, that you would continue to bless Liberty Counsel Ministries, bless the intercessors, continue to raise up an army to stand in the gap for this nation, for this ministry, for the issues that are discussed here today. We invite you to lead us in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you. Matt is founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, and he and his wife are the founders of the entire ministry, actually. Liberty Counsel Ministries, 10 arms that are now part of this. It's having tremendous impact globally, federally, and at the state and local levels. So thank you, Matt, for your faithfulness, your faithful leadership, and if you would give us some legal updates today.
Well, thank you, Summer. Thank you for this time. And let me just give you a couple of legal updates. One that's not necessarily a Liberty Counsel case, but it's one that was in the news earlier this week, and it's involving a federal judge, a single federal judge, that issued an order that says that President Donald Trump needs to continue funding about $2 billion in foreign aid through USAID. And that was requested by the United States Supreme Court to block that. It was a 5-4 opinion. And unfortunately, Justice Amy Coney Barrett and the Chief Justice sided with the other three, so it was 5-4. Justice Samuel Alito, on behalf of the other three, so 4 dissenters, issued a written dissent and said that he is stunned that a judge that likely does not have jurisdiction, by the way, to order a president of the United States to fund a foreign entity through USAID, which was created originally by executive order by President John F. Kennedy, likely doesn't have jurisdiction, can actually order the President of the United States to send about $2 billion to foreign entities, which we most certainly will not get back. And he said he was stunned. I frankly am stunned as well. Obviously, the case is not over, but it means that there's no immediate relief. So the question is what the Trump administration will do. Will they go ahead and send out $2 billion to these foreign entities? And some of these foreign entities, as we saw, they're funding LGBTQ, DEI, other kinds of activities that are directly undermining America. So when you look at what the deep state has been doing, particularly with this funding, it really doesn't matter who's president of the United States in their view, because you can have all the policies you want to, all the executive orders you want, pass all the legislation you care to pass, have all the kinds of good policies that could possibly be, but nevertheless, they're going to fund internationally these organizations using our tax dollars and promote issues that are diametrically opposed to the administration, to the people who voted, to our Judeo-Christian values, like LGBTQ, transgender issues, all kinds of other DEI type of things, unbelievable situations that they are funding internationally as well as domestically, but certainly internationally. So in other words, they're equipping globally an entity, a firewall, if you will, for their radical values that are anti-American and antithetical to our faith and to our freedom. So it's astounding. What will happen to that, I don't know going forward. Certainly the litigation will continue, so the case is by far not over. I can't imagine that the president would lose this battle, but he should have won it in this emergency appeal to the United States Supreme Court. So that's one of many issues that are going to the United States Supreme Court. I think one of the things that will happen is, and I think one of the critical things that we're seeing unfold here is, where does executive power lie? You have three branches of government. You have the legislative, which is Article 1. You have the executive, which is Article 2. The legislature passes the laws, the most powerful branch of the three branches. The executive enforces the laws. And then Article 3 are the judges. They interpret the laws, the weakest, supposedly weakest branch of government. So where does the administrative state come in? All the administrative agencies, IRS, CDC, NIH, FDA, FAA, all the different administrative aspects, they all come in because some of those are created by congressional act, but they are under the executive branch. And then others, like USAID, was created by simply an executive order, like President John F. Kennedy created USAID. But nevertheless, they're not a fourth branch of government, or they're not supposed to be a fourth branch of government. But over time, they have become basically an unelected bureaucratic fourth branch of government that have interpreted laws that are sometimes often contrary to the original intent and understanding of the legislature. And so there is a federal statute regarding taxes, but then there's the IRS that gives letter rulings. And that's their interpretation and their application of things. And it's the same thing with all these other ones. So who really is over that? Who really has final authority? Well, they are under the executive, because these are agencies that are designed to carry out the enforcement and the implementation of the law, the Article 1 legislative process. And so it's under the president. So the president should have significant authority in making decisions, hiring and firing, and deciding how these particular branches should operate. I think that's one of the big things that we're going to see happen in the next year or two with regards to litigation, is where does that line actually get drawn? How much authority does the president have? And I think it needs to come back to where the president has the kind of authority that these independent agents, or these agencies, are not independent of the executive branch because they're under the executive branch. And so when you have the judiciary interpreting the laws, now telling the executive how the executive must fund those agencies under the executive's control, not the third branch of government, not Article 3, but the second branch of government, the executive. That's a real significant change of our republic. So that, I think, is a critical thing that we will see litigated, hopefully clarified for the right reasons, so that these executive agencies don't become a fourth branch that are unaccountable to anyone else except for themselves. And for too long, that's in fact what has happened. They've been given a lot of deference on their interpretation, even though it's an extension of what the law says and it's not clearly in the law. They've been given a lot of enforcement power to enforce the legislation, even beyond what the legislation actually says. They've been given extraordinary power to fund things. And so the president needs to be able to have that authority. That's a big issue. And that's, I think, a clash that Donald Trump is taking on. And I think it will, if it goes the right way, which I hope it does, it will be better for our country in the long run. A couple of cases just quickly to watch. One of our cases is Kim Davis. I know you all have been praying for that case. I argued that earlier this year at the Court of Appeals. We're waiting for a decision from the Court of Appeals. And then whatever the Court of Appeals says in that case, win or loss, either side that's the loser of this particular appeal will likely ask the United States Supreme Court to intervene. In our case, it's very significant because we're asking for the Court of Appeals to rule that Kim Davis has an affirmative First Amendment defense. And she has a First Amendment defense, especially in this case, because the plaintiffs in this case are claiming emotional distress based on hurt feelings. So they have no out-of-pocket expenses, no lost wages, no medical treatment, no counseling, nothing that they can account for that has been a monetary expense as a result of them not getting the marriage license immediately from Kim Davis with her name on it. All they can argue is that Kim Davis, by refusing to give them the marriage license, and she wasn't giving anybody marriage licenses at that time, she was asking for a religious accommodation and clarification, that act alone caused them to have hurt feelings, and therefore the jury awarded them inexplicably $50,000 apiece with absolutely no basis to calculate that. So we are arguing that that would be clearly a First Amendment defense. There's a lot of case law that supports that. But beyond that, and in fact, if we win that case, it's not just for Kim Davis. She already has accommodation, by the way, in Kentucky. So not only she, but all the other clerks, because of her position, the legislature amended the statute. But this would give First Amendment accommodation and First Amendment defense across the board, way beyond Kentucky. But in addition to that, we asked the court to overturn a Obergefell. Now, the Court of Appeals doesn't have the authority to. They're going to have to apply a Obergefell, the 2015 law that distorted the Constitution and invented a so-called quote unquote right to same-sex marriage. We've asked the court just to preserve that question, to overturn it. That's a question that we have to take directly to the United States Supreme Court, but I think it's just a matter of when, not if. I have no doubt that a Obergefell will be overturned. I had no doubt that Roe versus Wade would be overturned. I always said it's a matter of when, not if. It will be overturned. It was overturned. Obergefell will be overturned, and it's a matter of when it will happen, not if it will happen. It will definitely happen, and we just pray that it's Kim Davis could be the case to do it. If not Kim Davis, another case, but certainly this case presents compelling reasons to do so. The second case is Zinsky versus Liberty University. We represent Liberty University, and Jonathan Zinsky began taking female hormones 4 months before he applied to work at Liberty in the IT department. Now, an IT person at Liberty in his role communicates directly with students, faculty, and staff. I know as the dean of the law school at Liberty how this actually works because I've interacted with IT many times when I was there. And so they will communicate with you by email, they'll communicate with you by telephone, they'll communicate with you in person. You can take your laptop down there. They have a lot of interaction with regards to retrieving a document, a lost document, some kind of glitch, whatever it might be, upgrading and updating software and so forth. So they will actually come into your computer. If you allow them, you give them consent, they'll come in. You can see them moving around. They'll change things in your computer to reboot it to whatever it needs to be done to fix it. So there's a lot of interaction between IT and the students, faculty, and staff. So this person is in direct contact with students and faculty and staff. 4 months before applying, he was taking female hormones. He applied, signed a doctrinal statement that said, and it's very clear, we are created in the image of God, male and female, and that to identify as anything opposite or other than your birth sex as male or female is a sin. Very clear. Couldn't be more crystal clear on this. And he signed off on that. He waited for the 90-day probation to expire, and after it expired, he comes in and he says, I'm quote unquote transitioning, and I want to change my name from Jonathan to Eleanor, and I'm taking these hormones. I want to get those covered by Liberty University's health insurance, and who knows what else he was getting ready to do, surgery and so forth down the line. They talked to him about the doctrinal statement. He intentionally lied when he affirmed that doctrinal statement, and when they terminated him, the ACLU represented him and now have filed suit. We just filed a motion to dismiss the case on the basis of several reasons. Judge Moon in Lynchburg denied that motion, but in doing so, he set the case up for a really good argument for appeal. I won't go into the technical reasons, but this case really presents some very specific issues for not only the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that governs Richmond, Virginia, and other states, but also eventually for the United States Supreme Court. And the two main issues are, number one, Title VII, the federal employment law, exempts religious employers from religious discrimination claims. So in other words, Baptists don't have to hire Catholics, Catholics don't have to hire Baptists, Jews don't have to hire Muslims. They can make decisions based in accordance with their doctrine. It makes no sense otherwise. Otherwise, a Jewish kosher store could hire or be forced to hire somebody that was not kosher. A church could be forced to hire atheists. It just makes no sense. And so in this case, when somebody is not in a line with and expressly opposes your doctrinal statement, that interferes with your commission of your and carrying out of your doctrinal mission, especially when they're communicating that with other people inside as well as outside, you should have the right to be able to make a decision. And there's case law to that effect, but not in the Fourth Circuit on this specific issue. So that's a big issue. Another issue is this. I don't want to get too technical on it, but there's the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act. If you have a Title VII, an employment issue, you have to first file with the EEOC, another agency, by the way, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You have to file with them, and then either the EEOC takes your case and sues on your behalf, or they give you a right to sue letter and you sue. Either way, the facts are the same, the plaintiff is the same, the law is the same, the court's the same. Everything's the same. The only difference would be the EEOC says, I want to get involved and take part of this case, or I don't want to get involved, you take it yourself. Well, obviously, if the EEOC gets involved and it's EEOC versus Liberty University on behalf of Jonathan Zinski, then Liberty can raise the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act as a defense, a very powerful defense. Well, if Jonathan Zinski says, no, I don't want Liberty to be able to raise the defense, I don't want EEOC involved, I'm going to file suit myself, same plaintiff, same facts, same law, same court. The question is, can you raise the Religious Freedom Restoration Act as a defense? Some circuit courts have said yes, some have said no. The Fourth Circuit hasn't ruled yet, neither has the United States Supreme Court. So that's an open question. It's a big, big question for free exercise of religion with regards to Christian employers, among other things that are raised in this case. So pray for those cases, Liberty University, and then Kim Davis. We have other cases as well, but that gives you a couple of main prayer points. Those are big cases that could have a huge impact nationally, and they could also have an impact for generations as well. So, Summer, I'll bring it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. It's exciting to hear specifically that Obergefell is going to be overturned. That's something I know many of us have been praying into for a long time. Can you just quickly speak to the efforts in the states? What can states be doing right now to be preparing or to be preparing for when that happens? I know Idaho has a resolution to overturn gay marriage, and then Virginia is working to enshrine same-sex marriage in the state constitution. Can you just speak to a little bit about the activity in the states, what states can be doing to help encourage the overturning of Obergefell or protect marriage as God defines it in the state now? And
yeah, so like Obergefell is very similar in the pattern to Roe versus Wade. You had Roe versus Wade come in 1973, and you had Roe versus Wade wipe out all these different state statutes that did not allow abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. No state did. And so many of those states did not repeal their laws with regards to restrictions on abortion. They still remained in effect. In addition, there were other states, as we were getting closer to the end of Roe versus Wade, where they passed laws called trigger laws, essentially, that would go into effect if and when Roe versus Wade was overturned. In Obergefell, you have all 50 states had laws that said marriage is the union of a man and a woman. In addition to that, you have a majority of states that have state constitutional amendments. Kentucky was one of those states. Florida was one that we drafted and got passed in Florida. So many of them have in their state constitutions now, marriage is the union of a man and woman, so that these lower court judges couldn't just misinterpret the law and become judicial activists. I don't know of any state constitutional amendments. There might have been one that have been repealed since 2015. They are still in effect. They're still on the books. I don't think there's been any state constitutional provision. There might be one. All these laws are still on the books with regards to marriage, except for a couple of states like California or New York, and then Virginia is another state that want to pass some kind of same-sex marriage provision. So what would happen is when Obergefell is overturned, immediately you'd go back to the laws that were in existence before Obergefell, and marriage would be the union of a man and woman again in virtually every state. But in the meantime, states can, like Idaho, they just passed, or they're in the process of passing a resolution. Some other states are considering the same thing. It's a resolution, so it's not binding. So it's not going to be something that would trigger judicial action because it's just a statement, but it's a start where they actually declare the policy of the state that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, and that Obergefell should be overturned. But in addition to that, if you think about how Roe versus Wade was actually overturned, there were laws that were passed that directly conflicted with Roe. And they didn't have to say no abortion, they just had to restrict abortion beyond what Roe would have restricted it. And that was the 15-week law, that no abortions after 15 weeks. That would be contrary to Roe. It'd be contrary to the 1992 Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So when that law was passed, that was a challenge to the 15-week law. Now, when you're litigating whether or not that law should be upheld or struck down, obviously, one basic question is the decision on which we're trying to make this determination even constitutional in the first place? And that's how Dobbs came about. No, it's not. So Roe is overturned, therefore the 15-week law is upheld. So that means in these other states, you could have laws that challenge Obergefell by passing different kinds of laws respecting marriage that would limit certain marital benefits only to couples of the opposite sex. That would be one. That would kind of return, for example, states to even a domestic partnership, so to speak, where it's a secondary classification, or that outright say, no, in our state, marriage is the union of a man and woman, a direct challenge to Obergefell. Any of those kinds of cases that treat same-sex unions different than opposite-sex marriage at any kind of level, that would implicate Obergefell, or any kind of law that says, no, there's just no same-sex marriage across the board. It's only marriage as a union of a man and woman. Any one of those options would trigger a challenge, and that would be a challenge that would go up to the United States Supreme Court. And the question would be, is this law going to be upheld or not? But the underlying case would be, is Obergefell constitutional? Should it be overruled nevertheless? And so in our case, that's what we are arguing, that in Kim Davis's case, Obergefell started this mess. Kim Davis went to jail for 6 days. Now she faces personal judgment, not against the state, but against herself, of $100,000 in damages. And then the judge tacked on another $260,000. And that clock, by the way, is still ticking. Every time they put an hour of time in it, that will grow. So a total of $360,000 in damages against Kim Davis personally. Now, that's a compelling set of facts. And the real question is, was the Obergefell opinion constitutional to begin with? Should it be overturned? And this is, I think, a compelling case to bring to them, that this is what you all have done with Obergefell. They've already said before regarding Kim Davis, she's the first victim of their errant decision. That's Thomas and Alito said that, but she likely won't be the last. And so consequently, the question is right before the court, when we get to the high court at some point, that Obergefell should be overturned.
Excellent. Very helpful. Thank you. We have a few minutes. Is there anybody that has questions for Matt on what he described today? Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Matt. So appreciate the update.
Thank you.
And now we're going to turn to Jonathan Alexander, who is the VP of Governmental Affairs for Liberty Counsel and Liberty Counsel Action. He is working on the Hill. He's done a great work for 8 years, I believe it is, for Liberty Counsel Ministries, and is now going to be giving us some insider Capitol Hill update.
Well, thank you, Summer, and thank you for focusing on Capitol Hill. I think we're a week after the Academy Awards weekend, and there's much drama. I think if you were to think of who would win Best Picture, the Oscar for the Best Picture certainly would go to President Trump in the past few days, where he gave really a tour de force address to Congress in this joint session of Congress. Nearly 76% approval. He set the stage really for what's going to play out in Washington, D.C. for the next few months. And it's the past 6 weeks, as you mentioned, has been another tour de force with the amount of executive orders and movement that's been rippling throughout Washington, D.C. and the rest of the world. So certainly the Best Picture award goes to President Trump, and his delivery of an address, a sort of thank you speech, lets us know that we're in the right hands for leadership. But every great Best Picture sort of needs a supporting actor, and that's where Congress comes in. So Congress, as the supporting actor, plays a role where they can literally put the parameters or the skeleton around the ideas that Trump has brought with him, certainly the mandate that he has from voters. Congress is really the one that builds the structure, sets the stage, and it will play out in Congress with the amount of votes that need to go on in order to push Trump's agenda. And so that's really what we can focus on. Congress is doing this in 2 scenes. So the first scene is playing out. And I think the best way to summarize the first scene is just by going to our website. Our messaging recently has really focused on that first scene, which is the budget reconciliation, where both the Senate and the House have to come together to reconcile a budget. And in doing that, there's a number of cost-saving requirements that each committee has to do. And part of the pool that we're looking to have Congress save is the aspect or the bucket or the pot of money that deals with Planned Parenthood. So the hundreds of millions of dollars that go to Planned Parenthood, we think if Congress pulls that back, that'll move us a lot closer to reconciling our budget. But for details there and the work that we're doing, I think our website and our messaging can be probably the most useful. So that's scene 1. Scene 2 is the continuing resolution. This is the daily sort of how we spend our money. So think of the beginning of the year, you sit down with your spouse and your family and you sort of plan out, this is what our year will look like for the budget. And you can put it in different categories as how much we'll spend on food, on energy, on travel, and put it in these different silos. Well, that's exactly what Congress is doing now. Except this time, the budget was going to run out in September past. It was going to come out right before the election, so they pushed it to December. December, we got a clear understanding of who was going to be president, and so they pushed it to March 14th, which, if you're looking at your calendar, it's less than 10 or so days away, 8 days away from now. So just over a week, that spending, the budget that they set out for fiscal year 2025, is going to run out. And so the question is, what happens then? And this is sort of where the drama is playing out. So right now we have sort of a four corners bill is what they call it, which is saying, hey, nothing we can do can go, or nothing we can spend can go outside of these four corners. This is the exact budget amount that we need to go forward for the remainder of literally fiscal year 2025, which will end in September. What needs to happen in order to get to this four corners document is a top line. So we have this much money. We're not going to go above anything, any number of this top line. And both Democrats in the minority and Republicans have to come together and agree on that top line. And so that has played out, I think, the last few days. After that top line is reached, it's basically handed over to the majority party, which is the Republicans. And they have to go through 12 categories of spending. So, food, energy, budget. In the case of the government, that budget has to do with, what we're spending on agriculture, what we're spending on energy, what we're spending on defense, what we're spending on education, what we're spending on all the different agencies, on foreign aid. All of that has to be played out item by item. And so it's broken out to 12 different appropriators or 12 different committees that have to work on this bill. But think of all that occurring within the next 8 days, and that's where the drama really comes. So there's two probable paths that can possibly occur. The first is that, and Trump has sort of tipped the scale in terms of this is what he wants to happen. We push this decision for the rest of the 2025 budget to September. So the fact that we're still working on fiscal year 2025, we're in 2025, and we won't get a clear outlook for what we're spending this year until September, kind of brings the reality of the urgency and really, the functioning of government, and in many ways that it's not functioning or could function better. The fact that we have to make a decision for this year all the way in September. But what that does is at least gives a clear runway between now and September for the House to focus, the House and Congress entirely, the House and Senate to focus on scene one, which is the budget reconciliation, which is really where all of Trump's priorities are. So he's sort of leaned in and said, hey, let's push it all the way down to September. We'll focus on this scene one and then get to scene two later on. Why this is important, and I know our time is short, is that we're just extending the same sort of levels that was negotiated between a Republican House and a Democrat Senate at the time. So this is, last year when the Senate was still controlled by Democrats, we're basically taking that same package, pushed it to December, pushing it now till 8 days from now, and ultimately pushing it down the road to September of 2025. So what's going to play out is a lot of political consternation, because there are some priorities in there that aren't conservative priorities. There's really no way to hide around that. There are things in there that aren't entirely consistent with a Republican-run Congress, because at the time you really had to compromise with Democrats and even get a Joe Biden signature back last year in order to put these things forward. And so you may hear, and if political commentators are looking at the long picture, you won't hear it as much, but you may hear some significant consternation from conservative political commentary saying, why are we continuing to fund Joe Biden Senate Democrat priorities? But the argument for that is we're going to deal with that in September so that we can have this scene one play out. There's a lot that you can say on sort of the principle behind that, whether or not that is the most effective way of governing. But if you were sort of wanting to have a prediction, that is more than likely what will happen. Because that's where Trump is leaning. However, there's one more thing that sort of interrupts that entire sequence, which is the president for the following year. So this is FY 2026. He will release his budget in April. It's sort of consistent that the president releases his budget in April. So say Republicans come back in 8 days, which I think may happen, have a continuing resolution that goes to September, and the president sort of interrupts in April and says, well, I really want, when we get to September for next year, that we start dealing with a number of these items, itemized this way and this amount of money pooled this specific way, then that may ultimately interrupt what happens later on in September. And so the question is, how much of the priorities can be written in the next 8 days between these 12 bills that sort of anticipate what the president is looking for in April, so that whatever occurs in September has sort of like a political seamlessness to it where everyone's on the same page. So if it seems complicated, it is because there are a lot of scenes occurring at the same time. There's a lot of overlap between the decision making that has to happen. One input or one body that has significant input are the Democrats. They know that Republicans have just a one vote majority. President Trump, realizing that, had to bring in the House Freedom Caucus to the White House yesterday to discuss, this is why you can have confidence in this plan going down the road and give your vote. The last time they had to vote on a reconciliation package 2 weeks ago, Trump was literally on the phone with members while they were on the floor late into midnight saying, please give me your vote and trust it for down the road. And so he's going to have those conversations again. He already started that yesterday. And the one party that needs to come to the table, and they know that they do, are the Democrats. Their one holdout, and it's a significant holdout, particularly mentioning what Matt cued us into before, their one holdout is saying, if Congress appropriates money, if Congress gives a line item that needs to be funded this way, then the agencies have to do it. And the executive of those agencies, the ultimate executive of all the agencies being the president, cannot withdraw. He cannot impound. He can't pull back any funding that Congress has detailed and appropriated. And that brings up the constitutional question of what limitations the executive has in terms of Congress appropriating money and the executive saying, well, I don't want to spend it this way. For you and I, we have been beneficiaries, certainly, of a president that has come in and says, no, we're not going to send, $32,000 to Peru for a LGBT book to be published, clawing back federal aid, clawing back even domestic aid that is filled with waste. We understand that the president should have some level of authority in impounding those funds, even if Congress has sent it forward. But the ultimate question is going to play out. Are the Democrats going to stymie this process, make it clear that this current president does not have the power to pull back funding, or are they going to join with the process of making the budget, getting it past this March 14th deadline so the government doesn't shut down, and allowing it to go to September so that we have sort of a fresh start at making the budget, not just for this year, but for next year as well. So there's a lot there. I can probably get to some of the details in answering questions, but those are sort of the scenes that are going to be playing out in DC in the next few weeks, certainly the next few days. So happy to answer some questions just to clarify anything that was mentioned.
This is Winyelle. Jonathan, what can we do to ensure that our tax dollars go to righteous causes now and in September, regardless of the timing?
No, I think that's absolutely right. So one example that we're really fighting for is defunding Planned Parenthood through Energy and Commerce. They hold a massive pool of money that goes to Planned Parenthood that, it's obvious that they're the number one provider of abortion, something like 300, 400,000 abortions provided through Planned Parenthood and their affiliates every year. But in addition to that, with their sex education curriculum, with their entire apparatus of hooking young girls on birth control that'll ultimately fail, and keeping the pipeline going for abortion, we really want to target them. And so not just in the budget reconciliation, we're going after them, but as Energy and Commerce writes a brand new bill, we want to make sure that that money isn't given to them next year so that we don't have to go through the fight again of pulling it back. So that's one very concrete, righteous, driven sort of principle approach to making sure that we have priority in God's truth meted out in the budget items that we're working towards. Also, for the first time, and this is probably we're still working through this. For the first time, State Department is going through a complete reauthorization. State Department and USAID is where much of the money has been going to in order to go overseas and fuel some of these absolutely terrible, abominable activities. Drag queen story hours in Ecuador, pushing from the American flag or the American apparatus to the rest of the world, signaling that we're going to promote LGBT agenda. Well, as State Department goes through its reauthorization, and we're working with the House Foreign to make sure that we can do that for the first time in 20 years, making sure that all these LGBT, pro-transgender, pro-gay marriage, affronts to God's biblical standard for marriage and family, making sure that those items are not funded at all, or there's no room to be interpreted that these things are funded, is probably the best way that our voices can be heard. And we've had meetings for the past few weeks. We'll continue to have meetings pulling out specific avenues where we're looking at God's word and saying, this is his truth here. And we're looking at the budget and saying, no, these line items do not match up. We have to remove these things. So that's a very practical way that we can affirm God's truth and make sure that our money, I always say this, if you're working 10 hours a day, 4 of those hours are being picked right out of your pocket and going to federal government or state government that's using your money to prop up these perversions. So that we have to make sure that what we're yielding to the federal government in terms of our taxpayer funds are only used to promote God's righteousness. And the very specific ways that I mentioned are, I think, ways that we can do that.
Okay. So as a follow-up, I agree with what you've said, but what can I do? I'm sitting in North Carolina in my little house. What can I do to ensure that money does not go to fund Planned Parenthood? What can I do?
Yeah, that's
in
excellent.
These next 8 days.
Yeah, so you do have a congressman or woman, I don't know your districting in North Carolina, but that sits on a committee where they'll have to vote either up or down on a particular budget. Calling them directly, you can call the Capitol switchboard, or even, there's websites where you just put in your zip code and it'll give you the direct number of your member and say, hey, I've paid attention to what the budgets have looked like in the past. I don't like how my money is being spent on these items. I like what President Trump is doing and clawing back some of these things. Make sure that as we're writing this bill, we're not writing into it any of these perversions or things that go against God's word. So a direct call to your member of Congress where they have to record your name, have to record your opinion on it, and just getting information from our website of exactly what to say is, I think, the best way that you sitting in your house in North Carolina can reach out to your congressman or woman and make sure that your voice is heard to claw back what is being done in your name, but what may be against God's principles.
Thank you.
Jonathan, I had a quick question. I know we're all wanting to see the president's executive orders codified, as well as the things that are being exposed through DOJ, and to ensure that we do not have, we don't go back to how it was. We wanted the transparency, the what's being exposed to, and the changes that are being made through DOJ to remain. And again, the executive orders to be codified. Where are we at as it relates to Congress passing bills that do codify those executive orders, or the administration putting in principles or regulations in place to ensure that we do not return back to the level of corruption and that we've seen in past administrations?
Yeah, so two ways to just sort of explain that. So and there are, of course, hundreds of executive orders. I'll just pull on 2. The first one that deals with the Saving Girls Sports, just making sure that girls' sports are reserved for girls so that these biological males aren't coming in. We had a positive vote on the House side, but on the Senate side, we sent that over. And on Monday night going into Tuesday, the Senate did not have enough votes to pass that. So this would have been a great opportunity for something that Trump had put forward in an executive order to keep girls' sports exclusively for girls. House had enough votes. Senate fell short on a number of votes because we did not have enough Democrats come over. So, that's one clear way that Congress can put forward or sort of codify what Trump has done in the executive orders. It just requires Democrats to come on board. And that's going to be the political rub that we'll hear time and time again, because we need 60 votes on the Senate side without having Democrats come over. It's going to make it difficult. But there is one mechanism, and this is back to scene 1. There's one mechanism that we are using now to get at least 4 of Trump's priorities through. So he's had immediately a border executive order, an energy executive order, a military executive order that benefited many of our clients and when it came to the vaccine, and measures on tax reform. All of those only need 51 senators to push through to become codified so his executive order can become permanent, or those executive orders can become permanent. It only needs 51. We have 53. So a number of those items, and they are the big ticket items that Trump ran on, I think we'll see those codified. And then the very last thing is what he's done in executive orders, pulling back foreign aid through USAID. What Matt mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court didn't do an effective job recognizing Trump's authority, or the executive's authority in doing so. All that funding goes through the House Foreign Affairs and the Senate Foreign Affairs and the State Department. We haven't had a clean reauthorization of the State Department in over 20 years. They haven't gone through the process of, hey, here's our budget for the year and this is how we spend it. And they've been able to take advantage of the fact that there's no transparency. But all that's being changed. We're working now with members within the House Foreign Affairs, meeting with as high of a level of senior members on staff there, just to make sure that we have a clean, open authorization of State Department, so that there is no wiggle room for them to take some of this foreign aid and fund it the way that they have been doing in the past. And that's at least, I think I mentioned, maybe 8 or so of Trump's executive orders, there being a legitimate path forward for this to get done. And as we go through not just this year, but next year and the next 2 years, remembering that this is a 4-year presidency, it's a 2-year Congress. So many of the assurances, and this is probably one last prayer point, many of the assurances that we've been asking for, members are returning to us with a theme of, sort of wait till next year, that we have to discover the rot this year. And we sort of trust that that's being happening. We have to set the framework this year, which we're involved in helping doing so that we can fix it all in the following year. Of course, we're going to verify that. We're going to consistently, and we meet every day to try to get these assurances and have reasonable markers so that we know we're not missing our goals or missing the marks. But it is and has been presented as sort of a process. So I think 8 or so of Trump's executive orders, we can be relatively confident will be done in the next month or so in terms of them being codified in law and never changing. But there are hundreds more that we need to work through Congress to make sure that step by step those are getting done.
Fantastic. Very helpful. Hopefully that gives some of the prayer leaders on a little bit more ammo, so to speak, to pray into. And also, again, there's tremendous impact when people contact their members of Congress and let them know exactly what it is that's a priority. So you've helped highlight some of those priorities today and give people, load their lips of what they can say when they contact their members. So thank you, Jonathan. We're running out of time. This has been incredibly helpful. Matt and Jonathan's presentations have been incredibly helpful. We have Amber on, who's going to now give us an update on DOGE. And we were going to have a hard stop at 11:25. We're able to go a few minutes over. So Amber, if you would give us now some of the good news that's coming out of Washington as it relates to DOGE.
Yes, thank you so much, Summer. My name is Amber Haskew. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Liberty Counsel Action. And what we are looking at right now is on the heels of President Trump pardoning 23 pro-life individuals who had gone to jail, gone to prison. Sometimes one of them was for up to 4 years and 9 months for peacefully being inside of a pro-life or a pro-abortion clinic. And so we have this victory right now that we're definitely celebrating, just to see those incredible, brave people to be free and to not be sitting in jail. One of the things that we are concerned about is how the FACE Act, the law that was used and manipulated to put them into jail, is still on the books. And the special thing about this law is it's not just something that federal prosecutors are able to use. This law is also able to be used by state prosecutors. And so there's a lot of concerns about if this goes through state court and if it is prosecuted and they're put into state prison or jail, that will they really have the ability from President Trump to counter that? And so we want to stand, and we've been working very closely with legislators in the US Capitol regarding how to best push a repeal of the FACE Act. And so we're our voice is there on Capitol Hill. We're meeting with legislators. We're trying to push this issue forward as best as we can. And we really encourage you to, first of all, pray about it. And to, second of all, to reach out to your legislator, make sure that they're aware of this, ask them to co-sign and to co-sponsor and to push this forward in every way that they can. So one of the things with Liberty Counsel, we were in 2 different cases across the US, we successfully defended individuals against the FACE Act. One was in New York and one was in Florida. And the situation in New York, this individual, a very kind pre-kindergarten teacher, would spend his Saturdays going out and witnessing and sharing the love of Jesus and holding a sign, just a very mild-mannered individual. And he was targeted and prosecuted in New York under this law. And when we stepped forward and we were able to defend him successfully, but it took years of really costly litigation and just that pressure, that weight of seeing the state is suing you. That in and of itself is this huge deterrent to freedom of speech for pro-life individuals in and around these abortion clinics. So one of the important keys is with the FACE Act, roughly 97% of the times it's been used to punish pro-life people. The bill itself is written to technically protect both pro-life people and pro-abortion facilities. But in practicality, it is used almost exclusively to punish pro-life speech and to punish pro-life advocates, even if they are peaceful. Like our client Scott was in New York. And so what we're looking at right here is, unless we repeal this law, people can still be prosecuted right now under state prosecutors. And the moment that President Trump steps out of office, we are going to again be put back into the exact same situation that we were in prior to Trump getting into office, and people really losing their freedoms, being jailed simply for their freedom of speech, peacefully advocating for these unborn children. And so I really encourage you to pray for this. This is going to be a difficult situation because we have to get through the filibuster in the Senate. And so it's not going to be an easy battle. And already we're seeing comments on the Capitol Hill, comments in the news media where they're saying that this is going to cause more violence and in an effort to try to preemptively fight against this repeal. So obviously we do not support violence, but we do want people to have, it's very important that we have the freedom of speech to advocate for these children outside of these abortion clinics and in other really important situations. So with that, I just want to leave you with the idea of keep the co-sponsors in your mind, pray for them to have courage, pray for them to have the words to speak to their fellow legislators, to encourage that others will step forward and stand up for this freedom of speech. And then just kind of especially pray for the individuals. We will need more Democrat senators willing to overturn this. And that will take something that God is just working in people's hearts to understand how critical the freedom of speech is in every single circumstance. We can't have freedom of speech protected in some areas and then not in other physical areas. So one other thing I did want to talk about briefly, we're working really hard on the defund Planned Parenthood. And that is something that we're very excited about. We have through March 14th. And I just encourage you to call your legislators and encourage them specifically to make sure that this budget round does not fund anyone who is supporting abortion, any clinics, any hospitals, anything like that. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it back over to Summer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amber. And I apologize for not doing the proper introduction. So thank you for doing that for me. You've done incredible work, research on so many things, including DOGE. Where can people find the extensive list of all of the federal funding and spending that's been exposed as it relates to the horrific things that we've been spending our tax dollars on for years. Where can people go to find that extensive list that literally line by line shares what has been exposed?
Yeah, so one of the, I'll give you this, some insider information of where I go to get my information is I really follow Elon Musk on Twitter. He's probably the first place that you're gonna see what's going on and what they're discovering right now. There's also a Doge tracker, which shows a list of all of the different things that they found thus far. And it even has a fun, it's kind of like a test, and you can test how well you know the types of fraud and waste that they found. They'll throw up two just absolutely ridiculous situations, and you get to pick which one you think is true and which one you think is false. And the fact that they're both so ludicrous and it's so hard to tell which one is true and false, I think is really incredibly telling. So we are building right now a full list of different things that are coming together, but that has not fully been finalized and ready for the public yet. But that's something my coworker Abigail has been working really hard on.
Excellent. So people can check back to the website for more information on all that's being exposed and covered through Liberty Counsel and Liberty Counsel Action. So thank you, Amber.